Okay, let's go. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to our webinar. Today, we are going to talk to you, or we've titled it, An Honest Conversation with Our Investment Managers. This session will last for 1 hour, so we'll be done by 2 o'clock. And it's a great opportunity to hear from people who are currently doing the job, to find out more about the role and also to ask questions. You'll see at the bottom of the Zoom, there is a Q&A function. And I really would encourage you to put any questions that you've got in there. And as we go through this session, we will absolutely do our best to answer them for you. As you know, this session has been recorded. So within probably the next 2 weeks, it will be available on the website for you to go back and watch if there's anything you kind of want to re-look at. So I'm Claire Stevens. I'm the Early Careers Manager. I've been at Baillie Gifford for 2 years. And I look after our recruitment across the programmes that we do here. But before we kind of get into the session, I thought I might pass across to our investors so that they can introduce themselves as well. Michael, will we start with you?
Yeah, I'm an investor on the graduate scheme. I've been in the role for just over a year now, so I'm just entering my second year. For the last year, I've worked on the European equities team, so I've part of the equities stream. My background is in biology, so I studied a PhD in stem cell research, and before that, I did an undergraduate degree in human genetics.
Maybe I will jump in now. So my name is Mir Bahram, and I'm a member of the Japan team at Baillie Gifford. I've been working at Baillie Gifford for 5 years now. My background is my bachelor's from international relations and my master's degree from Russian and East European studies. And I will pass this to Ashley.
Thank you. So my name is Ashley. I've been in the role for just over 2 years. So I'm entering my 3rd year now, and I'm also a trainee as well. I'm on the International Alpha Strategy, which is basically sort of looking globally except for the US. And my background is, so I did a PhD in the philosophy of science, so like sociology of science, and also did an international relations degree prior to that as well.
Great, thank you all for that. So what I would like to do, first of all, before we go into some questions, is just give you a quick overview on the programme. So you might have seen this in some of our other videos, so I will keep it fairly short. So we are here today to talk about the investment research programme, in particular the equity programme. It's a 5-year programme, rotational programme. So you rotate for the first 3 years in different teams and then kind of go into a final team in your 4th year. Applications are currently opened just now. So you apply through the website and the applications will close on the 13th of November. It's a fairly straightforward application process. So there's 3 stages. You would apply with your CV, 2 application questions. First round interview would be on Zoom, and then second round interview would be in person. If you want to find out more about our recruitment process, there actually was an applications uncovered session we done 2 weeks ago, and the recording of that is on the website. So I would encourage you to look at that. All sorts of training and development that's given to you as well, obviously to help you to become an investor and to learn more about the role, and we'll cover parts of that as we go through the session over the next kind of 50 minutes. As I said, do remember to put the questions in down the bottom, but what we'll do as you're kind of adding your questions in is I'm going to ask the panel some questions just to kind of get us started, and then we'll add some of your questions in as we go through. So the first one I thought might be quite useful for everyone to hear about is what's the actual job itself like? So what does a typical day look like? So let's start, Ashley. What would a typical day look like for you?
Thanks. So maybe, obviously, day-to-day things change, but I think typically what I would be working on is one maybe particular project over a few weeks amount of time. So it would be doing anything that was research that was related to that project or company that I'm looking at. So that would be maybe talking to some of the managers on that company to interview them about the company, doing a lot of desk research, reading about the company from their materials, earnings calls, things like that. So doing research around that company, whatever that might entail. And then also I'll be doing a few meetings with my team. So sometimes we'll have a stock discussion around a specific stock that somebody's looked at, and we'll all discuss it and talk about it together. or any other kind of meetings around the team around that, what we should be looking at next, how we sort of think about the portfolio. So kind of a split between looking at the company that I'm looking at and doing the research on that, and then working with the team to talk about the portfolio and things like that together.
Thank you very much. Is there anything that either of you would like to add to that, or do you feel like that kind of encompasses similar to your day as well?
Maybe a slight point to add would be that my days currently starts very early at 7 a.m., 8 a.m. because I'm a member of the Japan team to match the Japanese time. So I need to set up calls early on, but otherwise it's very similar to Ashley's.
Great. Move on to the next one then. So Michael, how about this one for you? What do you spend the bulk of your time doing day to day?
I mean, as Ashley said, it's quite varied. I think the thing that I spend the most time doing is just generally reading. I think quite a lot of this job is going to be reading and then trying to synthesize everything you've read together and get it down on paper. And, you know, you'll read everything around the company and then you'll try to construct some sort of argument through what you've read. So it's essentially just reading and trying to synthesize information in a cohesive way to present to your team. I think that's most of what my kind of day-to-day job and goal is here.
Okay, thank you very much. So still kind of talking about the job then. So Abraham, what would you say motivates you to do your job?
That's a great question. So ultimately, our motivation, our objective is to make money for our clients. But what's really exciting is that we get the opportunity to study, research very exciting companies that are growing, they are developing solutions, developing new technologies in various parts of the industry. So I guess this learning and engaging with very exciting people from very exciting companies is a very interesting part of daily job.
Great. Next, we're going to move on to key moments. So again, just thinking about, you've obviously all been here for a variety of different lengths of time. So what would you say has been your biggest challenge? Anyone got a good one they'd like to add in that?
I could sort of think of one week, because sort of for me it happened more recently. Sort of part of the investment job is to get some qualifications if you don't have them already, and so that includes taking some exams. So kind of the IMC exam, International Investment Management Certificate, and then also the CFA level 1 is something that you'll have to take, and that's something you're kind of doing alongside your full-time job. And so I found that really challenging personally, because I didn't necessarily have a background in economics or statistics or quant analysis or finance, any of those kind of things. So I really felt like I was kind of starting from a very baseline level, and to sort of get up to speed on that while I was still kind of learning on the job at the same time. I found balancing that, I found that a big challenge, but I got through it. It's possible to do it.
Thank you. I like how you added you got through it there at the end.
Yeah. I passed. It's done. Yes. Yeah.
That was an important piece.
Yeah.
What about biggest achievement? Michael, obviously you've been here the least length of time. What would you say has been your biggest achievement in the period you've been here?
Well, I think it's fairly simple. I've got something bought and put into the portfolio during my first year, which I'd say is probably my biggest achievement, because, I came in, I didn't know that much about the job. And, I really had to go at it to try and construct an argument as to why a company would be suitable for our clients to own. I think that's probably the biggest achievement I've had in my time here.
Yeah, good. That's good going for a year, just over a year. Well done. Okay, then the final one I've got on key moments then is, what would you say is the biggest thing that you had to adapt to when you started the job? Abraham, we'll give that one to you.
Sure. So I guess the biggest one to adapt, and also it's also part of the challenge, is dealing with uncertainty. because we are reading about companies, and we are thinking about next 5 to 10 years, what it may look like. But obviously, there are a lot of things that are out of our control. So dealing with this uncertainty, making a recommendation, and recognizing that there are some things that you can anticipate, but there are other things that are out of your control, and how you are emotionally and intellectually are dealing with this kind of uncertainties day in and day out is, I think, is a big thing to adapt to.
Great, thank you. So the next one, and I can see there's a few questions in here in this, which I'll try and thread in. So it's about skills and training, and thinking about that kind of transition, I suppose, from academic life into the work life. Michael, let's go with this one first of all, because there's a few people that are asking you specifically this question as well. What skills from university, like, have you found useful in the role? And I think the questions that are in there is actually moving from like PhD into this world. How have you found that?
I mean, it's not too different. You know, you're kind of using analytical skills to try and analyze information and data and stuff like that. So in some sense, it's not too different from doing a PhD. I think maybe the biggest difference between like doing a PhD and doing a degree here is that you're going to have to get comfortable with uncertainty. You can't spend your time drilling down into really granular stuff compared to maybe an academic setting, because there's a universe of companies you can look at, and you need to know when it's time to move on rather than to really figure out the nitty-gritty of it. So I think really it's just analytical skills, the ability to analyze information, that's really useful from my background at least.
And there's also, like, I mean, I know you've all done advanced study here, so there's a question in here about, do you have to have done advanced study? And the answer to that is no. So we have people who have done PhDs, we've got people who have done postdocs, we've got people who have done undergraduate degrees. It's not a requirement that you do advanced study. The other thing as well that's in here, hopefully you've heard from the panel now, so you realise that people do come from all sorts of different backgrounds. So there's not a specific degree type that we're looking for. So again, I think that's something else. There's several questions in here on that. So degree discipline and level of study is not something that we've got set criteria around. What I'd say is, whatever you're studying, it's about the interest for actually this job, as opposed to what you've actually studied. All right, so kind of keeping back on the skills part, what would you say are the most important skills required for the job?
I will take this one. Yeah, it's okay. So I guess there are two, based on my own experience, I would say critical thinking and imagination are two important skills, regardless of which academic background you are coming from. As long as you can apply this critical thinking and imagine how companies can evolve, how industries can evolve. And in general, I think, just maybe to add the previous question, I think, yes, finance background is, most of us don't have a finance background, but we are learning as a part of training. But interest in companies and interest in how companies are operating, how businesses are operating, I think is important, even if you don't have a finance background.
I think just to sort of add to that as well, particularly for me, because not having the finance background, and to add to that is, I think a skill, or I guess maybe a trait is probably a better word for it, is kind of like the tenacity to sort of get through it. I think sometimes in this job it might attract a sort of particular kind of person, and they feel they're doing it right all the time, or I've done this great work but it didn't get added to the portfolio, and there are days where you're going to feel like, man, I'm sort of here and it's my job and I actually don't know how to do it. What's happening here? But that's because you're sort of training on the job, that's kind of to be expected. So if you sort of trust that you'll try a different approach this time, or you'll look at a company at a different lens this way, that if you just kind of keep working with it, it will be something you sort of get to and understand. and the terms and the terminology will come to you. And so I think kind of having that kind of tenacity and trust for the process is something that will also be important, because that will come up a lot if that is not a background that you have.
Thanks, Ashley. That leads really nicely into one of the other points we want to make around perseverance. And I'm not going to ask the question because I think Ashley's just demonstrated really well there in the answer about why perseverance is needed for this job. And that's one of the key things that we look for. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. One of the other things, and I think Miriam, you spoke about this, that the need for curiosity in the job as well. You mentioned that in one of your answers earlier. But do you want to tell a little bit more about, like, what do you mean by that, and why do you think it's important that people have that skill, and what can people do if they're maybe not visionary?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think it's important because, sometimes you make an investment, you build an investment case for a company you study, you're intellectually and you're emotionally invested in that company. And then there are some short-term challenges, and you come to work, you see that stock is down 15-20%. How are you going to deal with uncertainty? How are you going to deal with short-term challenges? And what is your next step when this kind of challenge happens? So I guess dealing with having that resilience to respond to the situation, analyze, did anything change in my investment case, or investment case is the same? There are some short-term challenges that the market misunderstands, and you continue to believe what you are believing in, or you need to stay resilient, but also you need to change your thinking. And to give you another example from my training process, my CFA exam was cancelled twice or 3 times because I was preparing during the COVID times. So you prepare for it and it gets cancelled, and then you need to. So I guess there are examples of resilience, how resilience is important on both personal but also on an investment level.
Thank you. At least you got to do your CFA finally. What was it? Was it attempt 4 or 3?
I think it was attempt 3.
Oh dear. That definitely shows resilience. So one of the things that a lot of people talk about in Baillie Gifford is a culture, and we get asked quite a lot of questions on this. So I thought it was important that we had a quick chat on culture. Ashley, what would you say when you're thinking about work-life balance in here? How would you talk about it?
So I think probably the first thing that I should say is, particularly not coming from a finance background, I initially thought that a career in investment wasn't available to me. So it wasn't something that I had considered originally, because I was under the impression that the hours would be really long, that there would be like a really toxic, competitive type of work environment. And that is not at all a kind of place where I thrive or where I do my best work. So just to sort of preface this by, this was definitely my perception. And then I had done an alternative internship, met some people here, and found that was not the case here at all. So I'm not saying that, I've never ever worked really late, but that was more kind of my personal choice of wanting to get things done. But there definitely isn't this culture around, sometimes I hear, this reputation in some kind of private equity firms with some friends that I work with where, there's this real strong hierarchical structure there of like, oh, well, I had to go through it, you have to do this too. And that's not something that I feel sort of in my team or on the floor at all. I feel like there's a good work-life balance. It was something I struggled with when I was studying for the exam. But, now that that's over, that I feel like I can kind of do my things personally. There's sort of a culture where I can kind of be here when I need to be. There are times when it's flexible and I want to sort of work abroad for a bit because I'm originally from the US and can spend time there. So I think all of those things can take into account how it makes you sort of work well, because I think the first thing to think about is like, okay, well, how do we kind of put the clients first? And as long as we're still thinking about that first, then whatever kind of ways of working that is amenable to that or supports that is seen as acceptable and okay. And I think that's good.
Great, thank you very much. The other thing on culture as well is, I know a lot of you have spoken about perseverance and maybe sometimes when there's been difficulties in the job, but what about if there's times when you're not okay? Like, what kind of support is out there, or do you have trusted people you can go to, or networks that you reach out to? Ashley, have you got a view on this one?
Yeah, definitely. So there is a lot of support in general around that. So there are a lot of staff networks that, you know, sort of maybe diversity, inclusion, mental health, all of these kind of events and things that happen. I think the Mental Health Week is this week, actually. There's a sort of event that was happening. There was a breakfast. Everybody's invited to come. That's really encouraged. And I think just for me, kind of on a personal level, I do feel like I can share with someone if I'm going through something. They do a really good job of having kind of different sort of mentorship levels, where you kind of have a year group mentor, which is somebody that's not from your team, and then you have a mentor on your team, and then when you first start you have a buddy who's someone else. You know, you just have this kind of network of people to go to if you're really feeling that some things aren't okay. And you know, just to sort of say personally, on a personal level, I see a therapist, a psychologist, sort of once a week, and that's something I feel like I can be open with my team, and they support me taking that appointment and doing that, and then, you know, kind of getting on with the rest of my workday. And that is supported, and that is seen as, okay, this is going to make Ashley better at work, so this is something that's totally acceptable. So that's how I feel about that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. There's quite a lot of questions coming in here, but what I think we will do is we will touch on, we'll look at about relocating to Edinburgh, because that's something that comes up quite a lot. We'll talk a little bit about career development, because that touches on some of the questions as well. And then we can delve into some of these questions in a little bit more detail. So let's talk about Edinburgh. I think you maybe all actually relocated. Maybe not for the job, but you might have been in Edinburgh for study. So how did you find relocating? Ashley, I know you had obviously said that you did relocate, so how was that?
Yeah, I relocated for the job, so I didn't do a university degree here. So that was it was quite a big decision, because I was living in London at the time with my partner, and so that would have meant, you know, are we going to move sort of for my job? So that was difficult, and you know, completely honestly, leaving London for me was very difficult, because I like living in a big city and, you know, having that kind of around. But I will say, sort of moving to Edinburgh, that adjustment's been quite good, because you know, you can live really centrally. It was so much more affordable than where I was. The quality of life is very good, because I walk to work, I walk home, I walk to this place. You know, everything sort of is really accessible. And Baillie Gifford also provides a relocation service. So it's a company that can help you find a flat that's suitable for you. And I use that service, and I'm still living in the flat now that they were able to find for me. And we're super happy with it, and we really like it. So there is a lot of support for you to do that. But the expectation is that you do come here. So that's, you know, it's not really flexible around, you know, I can live in London and do this and kind of commute. That's not really it. So I did move for it, and found that decision personally quite difficult. But they do support you in kind of putting that together.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll touch on career development. So Abraham, what would you say around this? Do you feel like you've got control over your career and maybe the next step that you might take in it? How does that work?
Thank you, Claire. So I would say, in terms of control, I would say it's 50-50. 50% is the firm's needs, where your contribution is most needed, and where you can have a good fit and your research skills can be deployed. That's 50%. But the other 50% is your intellectual interests, which geography you are particularly interested in, what kind of companies you have interest in, large cap, small cap, and private companies. So I would say there is really an honest conversation involving several parties. So for the first 4 or 5 years, you are rotating from one team to another as a part of your training program. I would say probably first couple of years, maybe 2-3 years, you don't really have much control over the process, because you're assigned to different teams. It's great, because you don't know what you really want when you start. You're experiencing, you're learning from different teams. But as you progress with your career, towards the end of your training program, you have chat with your manager, with your year group mentor, the chief investment officer, and other investors. You can really even seek for advice. So people are very approachable. So based on these chats, you can kind of decide what the next step can be. But again, it comes down to this 50-50% kind of balance. And in terms of the next steps, based on my personal observations, people who start as an investment analyst tend to follow one of these three paths. So one common one is becoming an investment analyst. It means researching, analyzing companies. You are meeting companies, writing investment reports, making recommendations. Second path is becoming a portfolio manager. In addition to doing research, you are managing a portfolio. In the third stage, some investors say, after spending 3-4 years, they say, actually, I really like talking about investment. I really like talking to clients about our investments rather than doing investment analyst job. There are some cases where people are switching to the clients department. So these are three potential pathways. I'm currently an investment analyst, but increasingly involved in portfolio management in some respect.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so the final question before we go out to the ones from the group is, do you ever feel lonely working in this role? So like, is it an independent job? Or is there a team spirit? So who would like to take this one?
I'll take it. So I guess because we call this honest conversation, so I just really want to deliver this message. Sometimes, when people come to Baillie Gifford on their first year, they say, actually, your investment floor sounds like a research library, because everyone is sitting, and as Michael earlier mentioned, reading. It's very quiet. So I guess that's an important part of the job. So just to be honest with prospective applicants, just to let them know that this research process can make you feel a bit lonely at times, because you're spending most of your time alone, you're doing research. And then once you progress into the role of becoming a portfolio manager, then you are managing a portfolio. It's a huge responsibility, and you're dealing with uncertainties, and you're making decisions. So this challenge is there, just to be aware. But that's the challenge bit. But the opportunity is that you get a lot of support from the team if you ask for. Because people are happy to chat. People are, in terms of investment decisions, yes, you do your research alone, but then you participate in stock discussions, which is a peer review process. You're sharing your research with other colleagues, getting their feedback. So the first 50% may make you feel a bit lonely, but the other 50% is collaboration going on as well. So it's often, people may think that, it's always chat, it's always meetings, etc. But I want to make it clear that 50% is that, but the other 50% is personal research, independent research, autonomy, and you are doing your own reading or your own writing.
Great, thank you very much. Anything that you'd like to add, Michael or Ashley, or are we good to move on to other questions?
No, not so much. Just to say, sometimes you might be traveling on your own. If you're sort of going to a conference on your own, or you're traveling to meet companies and you're doing a big investment trip on your own, and depending on sort of the kind of thinker that you are, if you need to kind of talk through ideas and stuff, and if you don't have a colleague sort of traveling with you, that can feel really amiss sometimes. And, depending on what team you're on, you might be going to Japan by yourself, or I was in South Korea on my own. And so that, depending on how you feel about that can feel lonely. But, you sort of come back and bring your ideas, but depending on what kind of work you are, that can also dependably be lonely as well if you're doing some of that traveling on your own.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Hopefully this is helpful, given that we are here to have an honest conversation. Yeah, this is the idea, just to try and give you that background. Right, we've got quite a lot of questions in here, so what I'm going to try and do is we can go through them as quickly as possible, and hopefully we'll get through them all. That is the aim over the next kind of 20-25 minutes. So the first one I've got in here is, what process do you go through to identify an investment opportunity? Anyone would like to take that one? Off you go, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, it can be pretty varied in terms of how you do it. So sometimes there's companies that several people on the team have in their mind all the time and no one's looked at, and that can be a way that you look at it. Other times you could be doing, say, a screen on some software to look at maybe some attractive financial characteristics of companies, and it might pop up that way. Or you could be looking at a company, find maybe one of the competitors is more interesting than the one you're looking at. And that's quite a common way to end up on a stock that you're interested in. Yeah, or sometimes you just come across things in everyday life, and there's potential there. I think there's many ways that you can come across a company that you could find interesting as long as you keep your eyes open.
I think just to add one or two things to that is, when you go on an investment trip, you'll see many companies at once. And so maybe you'll pick up something from there. Going to conferences is also quite a common thing to do. So picking up new ideas from there is also a way for that to happen. And then I would say, lastly, depending on what your team you're on the team that I'm on, we've kind of got this sort of list of things that generally we would like people to look at. And then, so that's kind of, similar to what Michael said, that this is something that people have been thinking about on the team, but nobody's sort of gotten around to looking at it. So there's always some things that are kind of brewing around in the back of people's minds that people hadn't had a chance to get to. And so an opportunity to look at those comes up.
Okay, good, thank you very much. What do you feel is the most exciting part of the business area that you're working in just now? Or let's call it the team you're working in just now.
So I guess being on the Japan team, traveling to Japan is a great opportunity, and meeting a lot of exciting companies and having that experience of being alone earlier we mentioned that is a challenge, but also it gives you a lot of autonomy. So people trust you. It shows that your team trusts you to go alone and to meet a lot of companies. That's a really interesting part of being on the Japan team for me.
Okay, great. The next one in here is, how do you tailor investment strategies or styles to suit different unique client needs?
So I'll start and I'll let Michael or Ashley to add at some point. So our clients department is very helpful. So they are they are the bridge between our investors and our clients. We are listening to our clients, receiving their feedback, and also there's some product ideas coming from investors themselves. So this is really back and forward process, and listening to your clients, and also ideas and products generated by investment managers themselves. Would you add anything, Ashley or Michael?
I wouldn't necessarily add anything too much from that, because I think that the sort of entire client department, that role cannot be like, they have a really big role. There's no way to kind of like understate it. They do a lot between communicating to kind of clients what we do, and then if it kind of suits their investment horizon, because we're very, very long term, then that's something that we do. If they're sort of looking for kind of very short term things, and we'll be very quick to tell them that actually this is kind of what we do, and we do listen to them, particularly around sort of a lot of ESG issues and things that have come up. A lot of clients are asking things around this kind of theme, so we're really doing a lot to kind of incorporate that into our process, because a lot of clients are asking for that. So yeah, there is sort of that kind of two-way thing, and that's kind of how I see personally how it's been influencing us the most recently.
Great, thank you very much. This one's a little bit different. So how much do you use formal analysis versus informal analysis when you're thinking about companies?
I definitely do quite a bit of both. I think also because I'm going to kind of try to interpret what you mean by formal and informal, and then maybe informal means something where you just kind of have a discussion guide or some anecdotal evidence, or during some interviews you've done with some kind of customers or suppliers of whatever company you're looking at. And because that's something that is a skill that I had developed very much so in my PhD before, that's a real strength that I have. So I kind of tend to lean a lot towards it, whereas I know some people lead a lot more towards more of a formal analysis, maybe with a checklist and making sure they're looking at the financial characteristics, and then, you know, really sort of putting that together. It really kind of depends on where your strengths are and what the team is sort of looking for. But I would say I definitely do a bit of both. It's kind of, you know, I have kind of my informal story, and then I try to use sort of some quants and some data to sort of support that or back it up. But I don't know what other people's approach is.
Yeah, I think I try to gravitate towards data maybe a bit more than other people do. It's always going to be a mix of kind of qualitative and quantitative analysis, but I think I've got a tendency to try and like get any data from companies and try and analyze that, just because maybe that's a bit more related to my background. But I think it's really a mix of both when you do this job.
Maybe just to add one small point to what Michael said. So, you know, often we talk about qualitative research, but I want to deliver this message that we use numbers a lot. We do use formulas a lot. We do all these essential financial analysis. Given that we don't really focus on next quarter or next 12-month numbers, that's why we are saying that we are thinking long-term, 5 to 10 years, but we still do all these essential financial analysis tests and modeling, etc. So personally, I was feeling more confident with qualitative bit when I started, and I was feeling less strong in the financial analysis bit. But over time, with the help of trainings, you develop those skills as well.
Great, thank you. It's a bit more of a personal one here. What would you wish you had known before applying for the job?
I wish I read introductory kind of books on finance, how financial markets work, etc. Because I was always interested in companies themselves as organizations, but my knowledge of financial markets, to be honest, was very limited when I applied for this job. I wish I read a bit more about, in general, the history of financial markets, how financial markets work, in addition to my interest in companies themselves.
Michael, have you got anything? Ashley?
I mean, I'd say I'm quite similar to Mir here. I mean, I kind of wish I knew a bit more about the basics of accounting and like business analysis before I came in. But to be honest, it's not a huge deal, because you go through a 3-month training period and all of this stuff will be covered. So you do tend to learn it on the job. You know, maybe I wish I had a bit of a head start there, but to be honest, it doesn't matter, because you'll get the training to be able to cover this sort of stuff.
Okay, anything you want to add, Ashley, or do you feel we're covered?
No, I guess for me, more rather practically, I guess more personally, I think I sort of wish I'd known that you know, that I will kind of pick up and learn these things. I think sort of at the very beginning, I was sort of having much more of a kind of personal you know, kind of real doubt of like, oh, you know, all of this kind of stuff is really hard. How could somebody remember that formula so quickly? I, you know, totally messed up this spreadsheet. How, you know, I sort of thought, how possibly can I like sort of get this all right? And, you know, just kind of trusting that will come over time, and trusting that other people know that as well. I think if I had a bit more confidence in that, then that would have just sort of psychologically maybe sort of helped me get through that beginning time a little bit more, you know, trusted that people don't expect you to know it straight away. They know you don't have the backgrounds, they know you were learning, and that's kind of all part of the job. Yeah.
Great, thank you all. So this is a bit more kind of technical compared to the personal questions. this individual was told that we were an active investor. And can you explain how that fits in with a long-term investment approach, basically?
So basically, what we mean, I mean, I'll start and I'll let Ash and Michael add. So what we mean is that we don't replicate what index is. So we are bottom-up investors. We study companies individually and we find exciting growth opportunities, companies with strong competitive edge and with very good management team that we are ready to back on a 5 to 10 year view. So that's how I see these two things tying up. So you are doing your individual bottom-up research rather than looking at what is in index and trying to replicate it. And also, when you are doing your research, you are taking a long-term time horizon rather than next 1 year or 2 years.
Perfect. Michael, I'm going to give you this question because you're the one who most recently went through the recruitment process. So someone's asking about the interview. Would you say the interview questions were technical or not?
They're not technical. I think the real goal is to, you know, assess your interests, assess your personality, find out whether you're a good fit for the firm, and also whether the firm is a good fit for you. You know, it's really about attitude and interests more so than having some technical knowledge before you come in.
Good, thank you. Good answer. Yeah, it's absolutely like, I think a lot of candidates find it really surprising, but we want to get to know you, like who you are, how you think, and it's not a technical interview. So I think you need to be prepared for that if you're going to come into an interview process, because for a lot of people, they do find that a little bit strange compared to probably a lot of the interviews they go through in other places. So yeah, I would say be prepared for that. Okay, so how flexible is working at Baillie Gifford? So for example, are you expected to be in the office 5 days per week? So who would like to, so I know there's a bit of a difference across some teams, so do we maybe want to touch on this really briefly? So let's go, Michael, how many days a week do you come in the office and how does your team?
So I'm not expected to be in every day on my team. However, I do come in every day because I know I'm a procrastinator when I'm at home. So I much prefer to come into the office and get my job done. But on my team, generally people will work in the office 4 days a week and maybe 1 day at home. However, the team is also flexible. You know, if something needs to happen at home, if you're having an inspection or something like that, that's fine. Generally, things are quite flexible. You can go to the dentist when you need to and all that stuff.
Okay. And how does that vary across your teams? Is it similar or different?
I think it really depends on the team. So in my team, we were told to be in most of the time, and they were really non-prescriptive around that intentionally, but that we should all aim to be in together whenever there are stock discussions and whenever there's sort of like a special Desk Tuesday meeting that we have. So then it just means that everybody tends to come in on the Tuesday and Thursday, and then you have people coming in other times, and everybody is in most of the time. So I personally come in maybe every other Friday, kind of depends on how I am. And then I usually stay at home Wednesday mornings. And then the rest of the time I come in, but I'm always in most of the time. And then I'm always in for those in-person meetings. The other thing I would say quickly is that whenever I go back to Texas, because it's quite far and, you know, spending time with my family is important, that there is an allowance for me to be able to spend some of that time away working rather than just being on holiday, so I can kind of maximize that. And that there's sort of a limit to that, of course, but they're flexible around giving people the ability to do that.
Just to be realistic, I want to add this comment because again, it's part of being honest. In your first couple of years, probably not because you're expected to be at the office at all times, but because you would get most benefit by being around very experienced people. So even if your team is flexible, saying that, okay, you can come to work maybe just 3 days a week, 2 days you can work from home, you would probably have a tendency to come more often than your team, because you want to spend more time with your colleagues to learn from them. Because when you sit at home alone, you say, okay, it's good for research, but maybe you want to ask a question around desk. It becomes easier when you are in the office. So that's another benefit of being in the office.
Great, thank you. Slightly different answers, but probably the same message coming out from there. So, what do you feel is the biggest benefit you've gained through being on the trainee program?
But benefit, I think for me, just being able to have exposure to kind of do the job at the same time. I think it was something I can't remember, somebody else had mentioned it before, that you're sort of really trusted to go and travel and meet companies on your own and kind of put together reports. And you're given quite a lot of that responsibility very early on. And I would say that's quite a big benefit, because they're sort of training you to kind of learn the fundamentals around financial analysis. This is what these formulas mean. This is how you sort of look at a sheet, but also that a lot of it sort of is very hands-on, and you're really trusted to do that as well. I think, you don't have to think of a sort of trainee role as, you're kind of writing on trainee rules. You're not allowed to sort of do or see anything. They really kind of put you forward to sort of do those things. So I would say that's kind of a big benefit of that.
Another one in here then, again for you all. Can you remember a time when something inspired you at work? Some of these questions are quite deep. I can see you all thinking, because I know you like to think. So yeah, something that inspired you.
So I guess when you find ultimately, we talk about research. Yes, research is important, and we all enjoy researching, but ultimately our purpose here is to make money for our clients, right? So when you find the exciting opportunity, you see that this company can grow, or when you see a valuation related opportunity, it can be really inspiring, because you can imagine how much money you can make for your clients, how much value you can add for your clients. So ultimately that's our duty. So I guess for me personally, when I find an opportunity that I can see that we can double our money, triple or multi-bagger, then I get personally very excited, and my research writing process becomes faster, because I get personally excited about that particular company.
I'll offer something a little bit different, actually. So some of the teams do something called a reading day, and you sort of pick a book or something that you want to read, and you take away some inspiration from it. So I think one of the things that we did on one team was a sort of a sci-fi theme, and you had to read a sci-fi book, listen to a sci-fi podcast, or anything. It could have been anything, and then you kind of write around it, and then the end result was kind of like, what can you take away from this sort of sci-fi story, and how can we apply it to our investment process, or how we can apply this to looking at companies. And I found that really inspiring, that there was time taken out of the workday and a willingness to look at inspiration from other sources to try and extrapolate how we can think about things differently by reading a sci-fi novel, and that I found personally really inspiring.
Okay. Michael, anything to add, or will we move on?
Not particularly. I'm being reminded that my reading day is coming up, and I have to pick a book for it still.
Oh well, I'm sure people can help you.
Yeah, the topic is on Insight. If anyone wants to give me a good book suggestion, that would be very helpful.
Okay, I'll look out for any suggestions coming in for you. Okay, so a bit more technical one here. So someone wants to know about our investment approach. As we focus on long term, once we buy something and kind of put it into the portfolio, how do we monitor that over a long period of time? Do we adjust it? And does it stay with you and your team to manage, or does somebody else take that away and manage it?
So once we buy a stock, our research process doesn't stop there. We continue to monitor stock, and we have our weekly news meetings. We cover major developments around the stock. We have yearly or twice a year, or sometimes more often than that, communication with the companies that we invested in, regular catch-ups, understanding where the investment case is going. And yeah, the process doesn't stop there. But I think one important difference is that when you do a research, you are the sole kind of key researcher on that particular company. But once it is in the portfolio, everyone in the team starts to learn and understand the company much better. So everyone, because we all are invested in that company, then we have to build our own knowledge as well.
Perfect. Right, we're going to take a few more. Some of these might be fairly quick, some might not be. Can you tell me a bit about how the macro economy aligns to the bottom-up approach that we use? I'm not sure that's a quick one, but can anyone give a quick insight into that?
I mean, this is something that actually Mirbaharam and I were talking about a few months ago. It's definitely sort of, again, kind of depending on the teams, it's definitely kind of a bottom-up approach, but kind of being macro aware. And I think that differs around other teams. On the emerging markets team, they are much more macro aware because that's much more the nature of their investments. That's something that they have to think about much more. But this is something that we've been talking about in general around the firm a lot more, around how much more macro aware we should be around that. And then how I think kind of the way that we've been talking about on my team is sort of to think, okay, well, we're doing this bottom-up approach on this company, thinking about the kind of macroeconomic environment, what can sort of tell us that it will go through kind of the macro cycle, it will survive through the macro cycle, it will be stronger through the macro cycle. But again, those are about internal characteristics about the company while thinking about what macro might have in store for them. I don't know if anybody else has a different approach.
No, I think we're good on that. Then maybe slightly aligned to this, but when you're basically executing on an investment, in-house or is it outsourced, the actual like execution of it? I think we're maybe meaning the buying of it. Do we do that in-house or out-house?
No, if I didn't understand it wrongly, so if I understand it correctly, so I think this is a process-related question. So within Baillie Gifford, we have separate teams. So investors are focusing on investment research and making investment decision. Once we make investment decision, we have implementation, operational teams. Colleagues are kindly helping us with executing, trading, etc. So investors, portfolio managers, once they authorize the trading, they are not involved in day in, day out, the buying or selling process. That process operation itself is run by another team. So I think the question was about that side.
Thank you very much. So I'm going back to a bit more of a cultural one here. That's a really good question. So how much do you feel as a company we support diversity and inclusion within the workplace? So I'll kind of take this one to start, and then obviously you can add in. So we have like we've got a number of networks inside Baillie Gifford, which really go a long way in supporting our diversity and inclusion. We also have like a team within HR that have like created like a balanced scorecard report, which is initiatives and agreements that we have now across the company and across the partnership for what we're going to kind of do in the diversity and inclusion space. And I think there's support obviously out there for a lot of employees. If they want to start up a new network, they can absolutely come and ask that question about doing that. I suppose the other thing that I would say on that, and I'm very honest with candidates about this, like we are obviously based in Scotland, we are a Scottish employer. So if you are moving from other locations like maybe London, Birmingham, Manchester, maybe other countries around the world, like we have got a diverse workforce that reflects probably the community and the area that we are in. So that's probably also just something to be aware of, which is why when we go through the interview process, we encourage people to come to Edinburgh for 2 days to actually work out, is this somewhere that you would want to live? Is this the environment that you would want to be in? How does it feel for you? And I think that's a very, very personal choice for people. So yeah, I would really encourage people to take the benefit of that when they do come, but it's definitely something we're working on more and more within the organisation. But yeah, there's a lot of support and a lot of groups and networks out there for people, but I don't know if there's anything anyone else would want to add on that point.
Not too much, but just to say a small thing about the networks, that there is kind of a diversity and inclusion network that has a lot of other things kind of underneath that. So I'm a member of the multicultural network because that's something that's important to me, and we do get support to, you know, sort of post things that people are interested in. You know, I wrote something last year around, you know, sort of Juneteenth, which is quite important in the US, and you know, that was kind of posted on the kind of internal website for everyone in the firm to see. So there is kind of, you know, a lot of support around. There's this network here. We want to, you know, show people what we're up to, but you know, the kind of it is sort of reflective of the kind of environment that you're in. So that is something to kind of be conscious of, and you know, there are, you know, some ways to go around that. So yeah.
Perfect. Right, we're not going to get through all these questions, so sorry for everyone who's submitted them. There has been a lot of questions, but I think a nice one actually to finish on that's here is what inspired all of you to apply to Baillie Gifford, given that you had been in a more academic world bit before? Like, what was it that you sparked your interest, I suppose?
I'll go first. So I think I liked research, and I when I learned about Baillie Gifford that this company values my research skills, I got inspired to apply for this job. And also I didn't want to spend my whole career spending my time just studying one particular niche topic or particular industry, a particular academic area. So having these diverse areas to research, but also your research skills can be applied, that bit was very inspiring for me.
Thank you.
I'll go next. Is I was you know, finishing a PhD, and I had did a postdoc before I came and did this job. And I think if I'm completely honest, one of the things that really inspired me to apply to work here was just having a bit more kind of job security. You know, in the UK, particularly in the social sciences, when you're trying to do a postdoc or get a lectureship, it's incredibly difficult, very short term. Not paid for sort of the kind of amount of work and stuff that you're doing. You're expected to live, you know, move completely somewhere else. You know, I was in Austria for 6 months and then was going to be somewhere else for another couple of months, and was really looking for that job security that Baillie Gifford really offers. And I think also, again, to mirror what you were saying about kind of respecting the research that I put together. So before I was doing the alternative internship, and I did a project on blockchain technology, but I hadn't known about that before. And they were really willing for me to kind of try and look at something new that I didn't have experience in. And that was sort of really helpful. Whereas in academia, you don't always get that. You know, if you're not the expert, they don't want to hear from you. And so that sort of variety of the things that I would get to look at here attracted me as well.
Great, thank you.
I guess I'll say as well. I'd probably echo the stuff about job security, because I've also done a postdoc, and I know what it's like in terms of contracts and short-term employment and the expectation to move across the world, sort of thing. So I think Baillie Gifford's quite attractive because the graduate program is a permanent position. But in terms of what attracted me here, I'd lived in Edinburgh for maybe 6 years before I'd applied, and I always had this kind of awareness of the firm because of how involved it is in the community. But during the pandemic, I got kind of interested in investing, and I started reading books about investing. And I realized, you know, there was an investment firm up the road for me, and I started looking at the website, and I found that I align quite strongly with the philosophy of the firm, how it looks at investments over the long term, looking to support companies which are making change, and I found that quite exciting. So I found quite strong alignment with the firm and how they view things and how they view acting in the interests of their clients rather than themselves. I thought it was all quite good.
Perfect, thank you very much. So in the interest of time, we will wrap it up there, but thank you to everyone who has submitted questions. There's some really great questions in there. Sorry we've not been able to get through all of them today, but just thank you for coming along. As I said, this video will be recorded. It'll be online within the next couple of weeks. And thank you to our panelists as well for coming along. We obviously wouldn't be able to do this session without you. So your answering the questions has been great, and hopefully provided good insight into people who are looking to apply. I hope you all have a good rest of the day, and thank you very much.